Hey everyone, and welcome back to your channel name. Before we dive into tonight's story, I just want to say a huge thank you for all the support on our last video. It really means the world. If you're new here, we explore the darkest corners of fiction, bringing you tales that will stick with you long after the screen goes dark. So, if you enjoy stories that make you question the shadows, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single chilling chapter. Host, voiceover, tone shifts to serious and somber now for tonight's story. A quick disclaimer. The following is a work of fiction. The characters, events, and a certain, rather gruesome pig farm are entirely the product of imagination. This story is for entertainment purposes only. So, dim the lights, get comfortable, and prepare yourselves as we uncover the spine-chilling truth that horrified all who learned of the pig farm owner and his unique feeding methods. The town of Havenwood was a place that prided itself on its tranquility. Nestled in a valley carved by a lazy, meandering river, it was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone else's business, or at least they thought they did. On the outskirts of this idyllic community, down a long gravel road that kicked up a cloud of dust with every passing vehicle, lay the property of Silas Blackwood. His pig farm was as much a part of the local landscape as the old oak tree in the town square, yet Silas himself remained an enigma. He was a tall, gaunt man with a face that seemed to be permanently etched with the sorrows of a life lived in the shadows. His eyes, the color of a stormy sky, rarely met anyone else's, and his words were as sparse as the hair on his head. He'd inherited the farm from his father, who had inherited it from his. The Blackwood name was old in Havenwood, but it was a name spoken in hushed tones, often accompanied by a shiver, even on the warmest of days. The farm itself was a sprawling, ramshackle affair. The farmhouse, a two-story wooden structure that had long since surrendered its paint to the relentless assault of the elements, stood like a silent sentinel overlooking the numerous pens and enclosures that housed Silas's prized swine. And they were prized, indeed. Blackwood's pigs were renowned throughout the county. They grew to an astonishing size, their flesh marbled with a richness that had local butchers and restaurateurs clamoring for his product. Silas rarely sold to large corporations, preferring to deal with the local businesses, a fact that both endeared him to some and added to his mystique. For a young journalist named Ethan Hayes, the mystery of Silas Blackwood and his unnaturally large pigs was a story that practically begged to be written. Ethan had recently moved to Havenwood, seeking a respite from the cutthroat world of city journalism, where he'd grown weary of chasing ambulances and sensationalizing tragedies. He'd taken a job at the local paper, the Havenwood Chronicle, a small publication that mostly reported on town council meetings and high school football games. It was a far cry from his previous life, but Ethan was determined to find a meaningful story, something with depth and substance. Silas Blackwood, he believed, was that story. His initial attempts to secure an interview were met with a firm, yet polite, refusal. Silas didn't own a phone, and the only way to contact him was to make the journey down his long, dusty driveway. The first time Ethan had tried, a handwritten note on the front door had greeted him, "No visitors." The second time, Silas himself had answered, his large frame filling the doorway. He'd listened to Ethan's request, his expression unreadable, and then simply said, "I have nothing to say," before closing the door with a quiet finality. Undeterred, Ethan decided to take a different approach. He began by talking to the townspeople. He spent his afternoons at the local diner, sipping coffee and striking up conversations. He learned that Silas had been a solitary figure since childhood. His mother had died when he was young, and his father, a stern and unforgiving man, had raised him with an iron fist. The older residents remembered Silas as a quiet, withdrawn boy who preferred the company of the farm animals to that of other children. He spoke with Mr. Henderson, the owner of the local butcher shop. "Silas's pigs are the best I've ever seen," Henderson had told him, his voice a mixture of admiration and unease. "The meat is just different, richer, more flavorful. He has a gift, that man. A strange one, but a gift nonetheless." When Ethan pressed him about Silas's methods, Henderson had simply shrugged. He's a private man. Says he has a special feed, a family recipe. Never been one to share his secrets. The more Ethan dug, the more questions he had. The special feed was a recurring theme in his conversations. No one knew what was in it, and Silas was fiercely protective of his formula. Deliveries to the farm were rare, and they were always from a single, unmarked truck that came in the dead of night. Ethan had tried to get a license plate number once, staking out the farm from a distance, but the truck had come and gone so quickly, a phantom in the darkness, that he'd been unable to get a clear look. His investigation took a darker turn when he stumbled upon a series of missing persons cases from the surrounding counties, stretching back decades. There was no discernible pattern, no obvious connection between the victims. They were men and women of all ages and backgrounds. The only common thread was that they had all vanished without a trace. It was a long shot, a wild, improbable leap of logic, but Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that there was a connection to the Blackwood farm. The timeline of the disappearances seemed to align, in a vague, unsettling way, with the periods when the Blackwood pigs were said to be at their most impressive. He spent weeks poring over old case files, his small apartment becoming a chaotic mess of maps, newspaper clippings, and handwritten notes. He was chasing a ghost, a phantom of a story that most people would have dismissed as the ramblings of a paranoid mind. But Ethan had a reporter's intuition, a sixth sense that had served him well in his career, and it was screaming at him now. One evening, fueled by coffee and a growing sense of obsession, he decided he needed to get a closer look at the farm. He knew it was a risky move, but he was convinced that the answers he sought were hidden somewhere on that property. He waited until well after midnight, when the moon was a pale sliver in the inky black sky, and drove his car to a secluded spot about a mile from the farm. He then set off on foot, the only sounds the crunching of gravel beneath his boots and the frantic beating of his own heart. The farm was even more imposing in the darkness. The farmhouse loomed like a haunted mansion, its windows dark and empty. The air was thick with the smell of manure and something else, something cloyingly sweet and metallic that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. He moved cautiously, sticking to the shadows, his small digital camera clutched in his hand. He made his way to the largest of the pig pens, the one that housed the full-grown sows. They were massive creatures, larger than any pigs he had ever seen. They moved with a slow, deliberate heaviness, their small, intelligent eyes seeming to follow his every move. He noticed a large trough in the center of the pen, and it was from here that the strange, sweet smell seemed to emanate. He was about to get a closer look when a light flickered on in the farmhouse. Ethan froze, his heart pounding in his chest. He ducked behind a stack of hay bales, his breath catching in his throat. The back door of the house creaked open, and the silhouette of Silas Blackwood emerged, a lantern held in one hand. Silas didn't seem to be in any hurry. He moved with a practiced, almost ritualistic grace. He walked to a large, padlocked shed that Ethan hadn't noticed before, a building that seemed older and more weathered than the others. He fumbled with a set of keys, the sound of metal on metal unnaturally loud in the still night air. With a groan of protest, the shed door swung open. Ethan's curiosity warred with his fear. He knew he should leave, that he was treading on dangerous ground, but he couldn't tear himself away. He had to know what was inside that shed. He watched as Silas disappeared into the darkness of the building, the lantern casting long, dancing shadows. A few moments later, he reemerged, dragging a large, heavy-looking burlap sack. The pigs in the pen began to squeal and snort, a cacophony of anticipation. They pressed against the wooden fence, their eyes fixed on the sack. Silas dragged it to the trough and, with a grunt of effort, heaved it over the side. The contents spilled out with a wet, sloppy sound. Ethan raised his camera, his hands trembling. He zoomed in, trying to get a clear shot of what was in the trough. The light from Silas's lantern was dim, but it was enough. What he saw made his stomach churn, and a wave of nausea washed over him. It wasn't grain or slop or any kind of conventional animal feed. It was something else. It was dark and lumpy, with what looked like fragments of bone and fabric. He saw a flash of what looked like a belt buckle, a piece of a leather shoe. The sweet, metallic smell was stronger now, and he finally recognized it. It was the smell of decay. The pigs descended on the trough with a terrifying ferocity, their squeals turning into guttural, almost frenzied, grunts. They devoured the contents with a hunger that was both primal and deeply disturbing. Ethan snapped a few pictures, his mind reeling. He knew, with a sickening certainty, what he was witnessing. The special feed, the family recipe, the secret to Silas Blackwood's prize-winning pigs. It was people. He had to get out of there. He had to tell someone. But as he started to back away, his foot snagged on a loose piece of wire. He stumbled, letting out a small, involuntary cry. The sound, though quiet, was enough. The feeding frenzy in the pen stopped abruptly. The pigs fell silent, their heads snapping up, their small eyes now fixed on the spot where Ethan was hiding. And then, slowly, deliberately, Silas Blackwood turned his head, his gaze piercing the darkness, his stormy eyes locking directly onto Ethan's. A cold, paralyzing fear gripped Ethan. He was caught. He was trapped. The silence of the swine was broken, and in its place was a new, more terrifying silence, the silence of a man who had just been discovered, and the chilling realization that Ethan was now a part of the secret he had so desperately sought to uncover. The long, lonely gravel road that led to the Blackwood farm suddenly felt like a one-way street, and he had a horrifying feeling that he had just reached the end of it. The secrets of Havenwood were far darker than he had ever imagined, and he was now staring into the abyss. The moment Silas Blackwood's eyes met Ethan's was a frozen eternity. The silence that had fallen over the farm was absolute, a heavy blanket that smothered the chirping of crickets and the rustling of leaves. Even the pigs, a moment before a writhing, grunting mass of hunger, stood unervingly still, their heads cocked as if awaiting a command. In that suffocating quiet, Ethan's mind raced, a frantic scramble for an escape that he knew, with a sinking dread, did not exist. Silas didn't shout. He didn't run. He simply lowered his lantern, its glow illuminating his face from below, carving deep, sinister shadows into the hollows of his cheeks and the sockets of his eyes. A slow, chillingly calm expression settled on his features, an expression that was far more terrifying than any display of rage could have been. He took a single, deliberate step towards the hay bales where Ethan was crouched, his boots crunching on the gravel with a sound that seemed to echo in the vast, empty night. Panic, raw and primal, finally broke through Ethan's paralysis. He scrambled to his feet, his camera slipping from his grasp and thudding softly onto the dirt. He didn't dare to retrieve it. He turned and ran, his lungs burning, his legs pumping with an adrenaline-fueled desperation. He didn't look back, but he could feel Silas's gaze on him, a physical weight that seemed to slow him down. He burst through the tree-line at the edge of the property, the branches whipping at his face and clothes. He stumbled through the undergrowth, his only guide the faint sliver of moonlight filtering through the dense canopy of leaves. He could hear Silas behind him, not running, but walking with a steady, unhurried pace. The sound of his footsteps was a relentless metronome, a countdown to the inevitable. Ethan's car was a beacon of hope in the distance, a small, dark shape parked on the side of the deserted road. He fumbled for his keys, his hands shaking so violently that he could barely fit the key into the lock. He finally managed to get the door open and threw himself inside, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He jammed the key into the ignition, the engine roaring to life with a sound that was both a relief and a betrayal, announcing his presence to the entire silent valley. He slammed the car into drive and sped away, the tires spitting gravel. He didn't dare to look in his rearview mirror until he was miles down the road, his small car a fragile bubble of light and noise in the overwhelming darkness. When he finally did, he saw nothing but the empty road behind him. But he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that Silas Blackwood was watching. He was always watching. Sleep was an impossibility that night. Every time Ethan closed his eyes, he saw the contents of the trough, the glint of the belt buckle, the frenzied feeding of the pigs. He saw Silas's face, calm and terrible in the lantern light. The sweet, cloying smell of decay seemed to have followed him, clinging to his clothes and hair, a phantom scent that he couldn't wash away. The next morning, he went straight to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Brody was a large, good-natured man who had been a fixture in Havenwood for as long as anyone could remember. He listened patiently to Ethan's story, his brow furrowing with a mixture of concern and skepticism. "Human remains, you say?" Brody asked, his voice a low rumble. "In the pig trough?" "Yes," Ethan said, his voice hoarse. "I saw it. I have pictures. Or I did. I dropped my camera." Brody leaned back in his chair, the old wood groaning in protest. "Silas Blackwood is a strange man. I'll grant you that. But this is a serious accusation, son. You're talking about murder. Multiple murders, if what you're implying is true." "I know what I saw," Ethan insisted. "The missing persons cases, the special feed. It all fits." "It's a lot of conjecture," Brody said, though his eyes held a flicker of doubt. "I can't just go barging onto a man's property based on a wild story and a lost camera. I need more than that. I need evidence." Frustrated and terrified, Ethan left the sheriff's office feeling more alone than ever. He knew that Brody wasn't dismissing him entirely, but the wheels of justice in a small town like Havenwood turned slowly, if at all. And Silas Blackwood was not a man who would wait patiently for them to turn. He spent the rest of the day in a state of heightened paranoia. Every creak of his apartment building, every shadow that moved in his peripheral vision, sent a jolt of fear through him. He knew that Silas knew who he was. He had seen his face. And in a town as small as Havenwood, it wouldn't be hard for Silas to find him. That evening, as dusk began to settle over the town, Ethan received a phone call. The number was blocked. He hesitated for a moment before answering, a sense of dread washing over him. "Hello?" he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Mr. Hayes," a voice on the other end said. It was a calm, measured voice, a voice that was eerily familiar. It was Silas Blackwood. Ethan's blood ran cold. "How did you get my number?" "Havenwood is a small town," Silas said, his voice a low, chilling monotone. "I believe you have something of mine, a camera." I don't know what you're talking about," Ethan stammered, his mind racing. "Let's not play games, Mr. Hayes," Silas said, his voice taking on a harder edge. "You were on my property last night. You saw things you shouldn't have. I have your camera. The pictures are illuminating." Ethan's heart sank. The evidence, the proof that Brody needed. It was in the hands of the very man he was trying to expose. "What do you want?" Ethan asked, his voice trembling. "I want to talk," Silas said. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding. I have a story to tell, Mr. Hayes. A story I think you'll find very interesting. Come to the farm. Tonight. Alone." "I'm not going back there," Ethan said, a note of defiance in his voice. "You will," Silas said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Because if you don't, I'll have to assume that you intend to share your theories with the world. And I can't have that. The pigs get hungry, Mr. Hayes. And they're not picky eaters." The line went dead. The threat, though veiled, was terrifyingly clear. Ethan was trapped. He had no choice. He had to go back to the farm. He didn't tell Brody. He knew the sheriff wouldn't let him go, and he also knew that if he didn't go, he would be signing his own death warrant. He drove to the farm under the cloak of darkness, a sense of grim resignation settling over him. This time, the gate was open, as if in invitation. He parked his car in front of the farmhouse, the engine sounding unnaturally loud in the still night. The front door opened, and Silas Blackwood stood there, silhouetted against the dim light from within. He was holding Ethan's camera. "Come in, Mr. Hayes," Silas said, his voice devoid of any emotion. Ethan's instincts screamed at him to run, to get back in his car and drive as fast as he could. But he knew it was too late. He had stepped into the spider's web, and the spider was now inviting him into its parlor. He took a deep breath and walked into the house. The interior of the farmhouse was a stark contrast to the dilapidated exterior. It was clean and sparsely furnished, with a Spartan, almost monastic quality. The air was thick with the smell of old wood and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet, the same smell he had encountered by the pigpen. Silas led him into a small, dimly lit study. The walls were lined with bookshelves, filled with old, leather-bound volumes. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. In the center of the room was a large oak desk, and on it, a single flickering oil lamp. "Please have a seat," Silas said, gesturing to a chair opposite the desk. Ethan sat down, his muscles tense, his senses on high alert. Silas placed the camera on the desk between them. "I believe this is yours." Ethan said nothing, his eyes fixed on the camera. "You're a journalist," Silas said, a statement, not a question. "You're looking for a story, and you've found one, a much bigger one than you realize." He paused, his stormy eyes seeming to look right through Ethan. "You think you've uncovered a monster, a man who feeds people to his pigs. And you're right, but you don't know the why. You don't know the truth." He leaned forward, the lamplight casting his face in a grotesque mask of light and shadow. "This farm, this land, it has a history, a dark one. My father and his father before him, they were not just farmers, Mr. Hayes. They were caretakers, guardians." "Guardians of what?" Ethan asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Of a hunger," Silas said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "A hunger that is older than this town, older than this country. It's in the soil, in the water. It's a part of this place, and it needs to be fed." He stood up and walked to one of the bookshelves, pulling out a large, ancient-looking book. He placed it on the desk in front of Ethan. It was a journal, its pages yellowed and brittle with age. The handwriting was archaic. The ink faded. "My great-grandfather's journal," Silas explained. "He was the first Blackwood to settle this land. He discovered the anomaly, the presence. He learned what it wanted, what it needed." Ethan opened the journal, his hands trembling. The entries were filled with a chilling mixture of scientific observation and superstitious dread. The writer described a strange energy on the land, a force that seemed to emanate from the ground itself. He wrote of animals that grew to unnatural sizes, of a strange, unsettling intelligence in their eyes. He wrote of a hunger, a craving, that seemed to permeate everything. And then he wrote of the sacrifices. It had started with animals. But the hunger was insatiable. It wanted more. It wanted human. The first was a drifter, a man who no one would miss. The effect was immediate. The land seemed to respond. The crops grew with an unnatural vitality. The animals became even larger, even more robust. The Blackwoods had found a way to appease the hunger, to harness its power. "My family has been making these offerings for generations," Silas said, his voice a low, somber murmur. "We don't choose our victims at random. We choose those who will not be missed. The drifters, the runaways, the forgotten. We are not murderers, Mr. Hayes. We are providers. We maintain a balance." Ethan looked up from the journal, his mind reeling. This was a madness that went far beyond simple murder. It was a legacy of horror, a twisted, generational pact with some unseen, malevolent force. "You're insane?" Ethan whispered, his voice filled with a mixture of revulsion and awe. "Am I?" Silas asked, a faint, humorless smile touching his lips. "Or am I simply a man who has accepted the truth of the world he lives in? A truth that is far more terrifying than you can imagine." He walked to the window and looked out at the dark, silent farm. "The world is full of monsters, Mr. Hayes. I just happen to feed mine. And now you know my secret. You know the marrow of the truth. And that leaves us with a problem." He turned back to face Ethan, his eyes as cold and hard as river stones. "You can't leave here knowing what you know. You're a part of the story now. The final chapter." A cold, Paralyzing fear gripped Ethan. The study, which had seemed like a sanctuary from the horrors of the farm, now felt like a tomb. The fire in the hearth seemed to cast a blood-red glow on the walls. The secrets of the Blackwood farm were not just about a man feeding people to his pigs. It was about a family, a legacy, and a hunger that was as old as the land itself. And Ethan, in his quest for a story, had just written himself into the final horrifying chapter. The marrow of the truth was a poison, and he had just ingested a lethal dose. He was no longer a journalist uncovering a story. He was a sacrifice, waiting to be offered to the ancient, insatiable hunger of Havenwood. The weight of Silas's words hung in the air of the study, as thick and suffocating as the cloying sweetness that Ethan now understood to be the ever-present scent of death. The final chapter. The phrase echoed in his mind, a death knell for the life he had known, for the future he had once imagined. He was no longer an observer, a chronicler of events. He had become the event itself, the final, gruesome punctuation mark on a story that stretched back through generations of blood and soil. "What are you going to do to me?" Ethan asked, his voice a fragile thread in the oppressive silence. He was surprised by his own calmness, a strange, detached serenity that had settled over him in the face of certain doom. The terror was still there, a cold, hard knot in the pit of his stomach, but it was overlaid with a sense of grim, almost academic, curiosity. He was a journalist to the end, and this, he knew, was the ultimate final story. Silas did not answer immediately. He walked back to his desk and sat down, his large frame seeming to absorb the dim light of the oil lamp. He steepled his fingers, his stormy eyes fixed on Ethan's, a disconcerting blend of pity and resolve in his gaze. "That depends on you, Mr. Hayes," he said at last, his voice a low, even rumble. "You have seen the truth. The question is, can you accept it?" Ethan stared at him, uncomprehending. "Accept it? You're a serial killer. Your family has been murdering people for generations to feed the dirt beneath our feet." A simplistic, yet not entirely inaccurate, assessment, Silas conceded, a flicker of something that might have been amusement in his eyes. "But you see it only as an act of destruction. You do not see the creation that comes from it. The balance." He gestured to the window, to the dark, unseen fields beyond. "This land, Mr. Hayes, it is a living entity, a demanding one, a hungry one, but it is also a generous one. It gives back tenfold what it is given. My family's sacrifices, they have not been in vain. They have ensured the prosperity of this valley for over a century. The unnaturally bountiful harvests, the inexplicable health of the livestock, the very tranquility of Havenwood. It is all paid for. In blood." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to an intense, almost hypnotic, whisper. "The world is a far stranger, and more brutal, place than you can imagine. There are forces at play, ancient and powerful, that defy your modern sensibilities. We, the Blackwoods, we are simply liaisons. We are the ones who understand the old ways, the old pacts. We are the ones who do what is necessary to maintain the peace." Ethan's mind reeled. It was a delusion, a carefully constructed fantasy to justify a legacy of unspeakable horror. And yet, there was a terrifying coherence to it. The missing persons, the unnaturally large pigs, the strange prosperity of the valley. It all clicked into place, a puzzle of madness and murder. "You're asking me to believe in a monster in the ground," Ethan said, his voice laced with a desperate, incredulous skepticism. "I am not asking you to believe," Silas said, his voice hardening. "I am telling you the truth, a truth that you now carry, and a truth this powerful cannot be allowed to simply walk out my door and into the pages of your little newspaper." He stood up and began to pace the room, his long shadow a grotesque, dancing figure on the wall. "I have a proposition for you, Mr. Hayes, a choice." He stopped and turned to face Ethan, his expression unreadable. "You can become the next offering. Your disappearance will be just another unsolved mystery, another ghost in the files of your skeptical sheriff. The pigs are always hungry, and the land will be grateful. He let the words hang in the air, a chilling, unspoken threat. Or, he continued, his voice softening slightly, you can become a part of the legacy. Ethan stared at him, his heart pounding. What do you mean? I am the last of my line, Silas said, a note of weariness in his voice. I have no children. The burden of this responsibility dies with me, but the hunger will not. Without a caretaker, without someone to appease it, the balance will be broken. The prosperity of this valley will turn to blight. The tranquility will turn to something else, something far worse. He looked at Ethan, his stormy eyes boring into him. You are intelligent. You are resourceful. You sought out the truth and you found it. You have looked into the abyss, and you have not gone mad. You have the capacity to understand, to accept. You want me to take your place. Ethan whispered, the words feeling alien on his tongue. You want me to become you. I want you to become a guardian, Silas corrected him. A preserver. I will teach you, Mr. Hayes. I will show you how to choose the offerings, how to read the signs, how to maintain the balance. You will have a purpose, a real purpose, far greater than any story you could ever write. It was a monstrous proposition, an invitation to join a dynasty of death. And yet, a small, dark part of Ethan's mind was intrigued. He had spent his life chasing stories, chasing meaning. And here it was, a story so vast, so profound, that it encompassed life and death, creation and destruction. It was a chance to be a part of something ancient, something powerful, something real. Why me? Ethan asked, his voice barely a whisper. Because you were clever enough to find me? Silas said, a faint, almost imperceptible smile on his lips. And because you were foolish enough to come back. He walked to the desk and picked up the camera. He opened the back and removed the memory card. He held it out to Ethan. The choice is yours, Mr. Hayes, he said. You can take this card, walk out that door, and try to convince the world of a truth it is not ready to hear. And I will hunt you down, and you will become just another meal. Or, you can leave it here. You can accept the truth, and you can begin your education. Ethan looked at the small, black square in Silas's hand. It was his proof, his story, his salvation, and his death sentence. He looked at Silas, at the ancient, leather-bound journal on the desk, at the fire crackling in the hearth. He thought of the world outside, a world that would dismiss his story as the ravings of a lunatic. He thought of Sheriff Brody, of his well-meaning but ultimately ineffectual skepticism. And then he thought of the pigs, their small, intelligent eyes, their terrifying, insatiable hunger. He thought of the land, the living, breathing, hungry entity that lay beneath his feet. He had looked into the abyss, and the abyss was now offering him a throne. With a slow, deliberate movement, a movement that felt both like a surrender and a coronation, Ethan reached out and closed Silas's hand over the memory card. Leave it, Ethan said, his voice a low, steady whisper that he barely recognized as his own. I'll begin my education. A slow, genuine smile spread across Silas Blackwood's face, a smile that transformed his gaunt, sorrowful features into something fatherly. I knew you would understand, he said, his voice filled with a strange paternal pride. The legacy of the damned is a heavy one, my boy, but you will learn to bear it. You will learn to feed the hunger. He placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, a gesture that was both a welcome and a binding. Come, he said, the first lesson is about to begin. The pigs are waiting. He led Ethan out of the study, out of the farmhouse, and into the dark, silent night. The air was cool and crisp, but Ethan no longer felt the chill. He felt purpose, a terrible, monstrous, and profound purpose. As they approached the pig pen, the swine began to stir, their soft snorts and grunts a chorus of anticipation. They were not just animals, Ethan now understood. They were acolytes. They were the high priests of the hunger. Silas handed him a bucket filled with a dark, lumpy mixture, the sweet, metallic smell rising from it like a perverse incense. It was heavy, far heavier than it looked. Ethan's stomach turned, but he did not falter. He took the bucket, his hands steady, and walked to the trough. He looked down at the pigs, at their eager, upturned faces, their small, intelligent eyes reflecting the pale moonlight. He saw in them a reflection of the ancient, insatiable hunger of the land. And he saw in himself a reflection of the long, dark line of Blackwoods who had stood in this very spot, performing this same gruesome ritual for generations. He was a part of the story now. He was a part of the legacy. He took a deep breath, the foul air filling his lungs, and he tipped the bucket, offering the sacrifice to the waiting darkness. The spine-chilling truth that had once horrified him was now his own. And the silence of the swine was a silence he now understood. It was the silence of a pact that he had just sealed with the blood of the forgotten, and the soul of a journalist who had dug too deep and found a truth far more terrifying than any headline he could ever have written. The farm had a new caretaker, and the hunger would be fed.